imagine, if you will, trying to write an instruction manual for a perfect human society. Like, just think about the sheer scale of that task.
Yeah, it's a massive headache to even conceptualize.
Right, you'd have to map out how everyone on the entire planet should interact, how resources get shared, and, how we actually find meaning in our lives.
Exactly.
But instead of, like, hiring a team of philosophers, sociologists, and ethicists to draft it up in some closed room, you decide to crowdsource it. You open up a blank document on the internet and ask the entire globe to fill in the blanks.
It conjures a pretty wild image, honestly. I mean, just think about the last time you scrolled through the comment section of a mildly controversial news
Oh,
article.
please don't remind me. It's a nightmare.
Right. So the idea of that same unfiltered, chaotic mechanism trying to agree on the ultimate rules for human morality, it just seems like a recipe for absolute gridlock.
It totally seems impossible. And yet, that is the exact premise of the material we are looking at today. For this deep dive, we're examining a single fascinating document from 2014.
Yeah, it's such a unique text.
It really is. It's an open letter written by an author named Shuo Feng, which was later translated into English by a dedicated team. And the document is titled, Collecting New Era Life Values from Global Citizens.
And the ambition of this document is just staggering. I mean, the author is essentially calling upon the entire world to help compile exactly 800 rules for living.
800, not like 799.
Exactly. Not a loose collection of good ideas, but a definitive numbered list.
Yeah.
800 foundational values to basically rewrite the human operating system.
So the mission of our deep dive today is to explore this ambitious blueprint for what the text calls the Lifechanyuan era. We're going to examine how this document attempts to gather the world's wisdom into this highly specific set of values.
And we'll look at the somewhat rigid and frankly completely fascinating criteria the author demands from anyone who wants to contribute.
Okay, let's unpack this, because before we get into the incredibly strict rules of how you actually submit an idea, we really need to understand the grand vision. Like, why are they doing this in the first place?
Well, the document lays out a deeply utopian vision, and it uses this highly poetic language to do so. It specifically states that the ultimate goal is to realize a world where the talented will be put to good use and the whole world will be one family.
Wow.
Yeah, it aims to completely eradicate the divisions that currently define global politics and economics.
And the text goes even further into these evocative, almost ancient-sounding ideals, right? Like, it paints a picture of a society where no one would pocket anything found on the ground, and where doors are not bolted at night.
I love that imagery.
It's beautiful.
Yeah.
It envisions a baseline human condition where everyone is joyful, free, blessed, and where humanity develops sustainably alongside nature.
You know, the phrasing there about unbolted doors is particularly revealing, I think. That isn't just a comment on the absence of property crime.
Right, it's deeper than that.
Exactly. It's a statement about the total elimination of fear. If doors are unbolted, it implies the establishment of absolute, unquestioned trust between human beings.
Which is huge.
Right. And to achieve that requires a fundamental rewiring of how society operates at a psychological level.
It actually reminds me of like an open source software project,
Mm-hmm.
where a core developer sets up the basic framework for a new application and then invites programmers from all over the world to submit code to make it better.
To patch the vulnerabilities and fix the bugs.
Exactly. Except in this scenario, they aren't trying to code a better web browser or a new operating system for a phone. They are literally trying to code human morality. They're looking for global patches and updates for human nature itself.
And that software analogy holds up perfectly when you consider how the text frames the timeline of this wisdom. The author explicitly states that the purpose of this collection is to comprehensively inherit the wisdom of past saints and sages,
while simultaneously absorbing the precious thoughts of today's saints and sages.
Exactly. They are trying to bridge the ancient with the modern. They recognize that you can't just throw away the past.
Yet, you need that foundation.
Right. The architecture requires the best of historical human wisdom, the foundations laid by the past saints. But the text acknowledges that the modern world has generated unprecedented complexity.
So today's saints have vital new perspectives to offer.
Exactly. The ultimate operating system for humanity requires both that ancient, sturdy foundation and contemporary dynamic updates.
But I mean, a vision of unbolted doors and global families requires absolute trust. And how do you manufacture global trust among 8 billion people?
That is the million-dollar question.
Right. Having a beautiful poetic dream is one thing. The mechanics of organizing those billions of voices into a cohesive system without it turning into a contradictory pile of opinions is something else entirely.
Oh, absolutely. It would normally be chaos.
But according to this document, you achieve that through incredibly aggressive quality control on human thought. Which brings us to the rules of submission.
And the constraints placed on the contributors are really the most revealing part of the entire initiative. This is essentially a rigorous filtration system for human morality.
So let's look at who is actually allowed to participate in this third revision of the 800 values. The text proclaims that every citizen on Earth can take part.
Anyone at all.
Yeah, it explicitly states that it does not matter what religion, political party, country, nation, or ethnic background you belong to. The door is wide open to anyone interested in selflessly demoting their wisdom.
On the surface, it sounds like a radically inclusive invitation. It posits that valuable wisdom is a universal human trait, not restricted by arbitrary human borders, cultural background, or belief system.
Right, which sounds great.
It does, but the caveat attached to that invitation completely flips the dynamic.
It is a massive caveat. The text makes a very firm, unyielding distinction. The author writes, we are calling for life values, not market values, country values, religious values, values for political parties.
Contributors are basically being asked to perform a kind of intellectual surgery on their own belief systems.
Intellectual surgery, I like that.
Yeah, because the text demands that you strip away all the institutional frameworks that usually define how we view the world and our place in it. They want the raw, fundamental human element completely divorced from economics, nationalism, or organized theology.
See, I really have to push back on the feasibility of this whole concept. Like, how can any individual truly separate a life value entirely from their cultural or religious background?
It's incredibly difficult, if not impossible.
Right. If I grew up in a highly specific economic system or a very distinct cultural tradition, my baseline definition of what constitutes a good life is inevitably colored by that experience. The idea that you can isolate a pure, context-free life value seems to ignore how human beings actually form their worldviews.
I agree, it is an almost impossible demand. You are asking people to extract a universal truth while entirely leaving behind the cultural packaging that gave that truth its meaning in their lives.
And the formatting constraints make it even harder. The text demands that submissions be condensed into a single sentence.
A single sentence.
Yeah, it actually says use one sentence instead of two sentences if it is already clear enough. No long texts. No explaining the history of your value.
No context whatsoever.
Exactly. No presenting your philosophical reasoning, just the rule itself. I mean, think about how hard it is to get a family to agree on a single sentence for a group chat name.
Oh, totally.
The idea that you can distill profound, nuanced human wisdom into a single, isolated sentence without losing the very context that makes it meaningful is just wild to me.
Well, what's fascinating here is how the text defines the very nature of a value, which kind of explains this seemingly impossible constraint.
Also,
The author argues that values are the crystallization of wisdom and thoughts, but that thoughts and wisdom themselves are not values. This is a crucial distinction.
okay, walk me through that. How is wisdom not a value?
According to the logic of this blueprint, wisdom and thoughts are the messy, complex observations you make about how the universe works, or, your deep philosophical reasoning about why people suffer.
So that's the processing phase.
Exactly. But a value, in the strict context of this document, must be an actionable life principle to follow. The text implies a belief that ultimate truth is inherently simple.
Right, so any nuance is just fluff.
Pretty much. Complexity, nuance, and long-winded explanations are viewed as flaws in human reasoning, or perhaps just the unnecessary baggage of those cultural institutions we mentioned earlier.
So to use a very basic example, the thought process might be fire is hot, it consumes oxygen, and if it touches human skin, it destroys tissue and causes immense pain. That's the wisdom.
Yes, that's the observation.
But the value, the crystallized output, is simply do not touch the fire.
That is the exact mechanism. They do not want your essay on the nature of combustion. They just want the rule that keeps the society functioning safely.
Wow.
They're looking for the final, synthesized output. They want the executable command, stripping away all the processing code that got you there.
That definitely explains the strictness of the single-sentence rule, even if executing it requires a monumental level of self-editing. So let's assume someone actually manages to do this.
A big assumption, but sure.
Right. They successfully bypass their political biases, they crystallize their worldly wisdom, and they craft a single, flawless, punchy sentence. What kind of topics are actually on the table?
Oh, the scoop is massive.
Yeah, if we look at the 8 pillars the text asks contributors to address, it reveals the dizzying scope of this project.
The 8 aspects cover a comprehensive sweep of human existence. It's not just a list of polite suggestions, it is an architectural plan for reality.
We won't go through all 8 today, but just looking at a few of them side by side shows just how massive this undertaking is. For instance, the text asks contributors to identify what values, modes, and phenomena in people's current lives are ignorant and backward, and to explicitly state what new ones should replace them.
And that completely transforms the project from a passive collection of good thoughts into a highly active, disruptive global audit.
A global audit, yeah.
It demands a critical dismantling of modern society. You aren't just building a new house, you're explicitly asked to point out which load-bearing walls in the current house are rotting and need to be torn down.
But the danger there is obvious, isn't it?
Yeah.
One person's ignorant and backward mode of living is another person's deeply held, sacred tradition.
Absolutely.
The hubris required to definitively label a human practice as universally backward and then mandate its replacement is immense.
It requires a level of objective detachment that human beings historically struggle to achieve, to say the least. Yet, the text places this massive responsibility squarely on the shoulders of the average global citizen.
And while they're auditing the entirety of human culture on one hand, another pillar asks for the definition of civilization itself, specifically focusing on what kind of civilized principles and etiquette we should follow.
So we're moving from the grand dismantling of societal structures right down to daily manners.
Exactly. How we greet each other, how we show respect in passing on the street.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, the sheer scale of the architecture becomes apparent when you look at the final pillars. Because after defining daily etiquette, the text zooms out to an almost incomprehensible degree.
It really does.
It states, the universe is infinite and creation is limitless, so toward what direction should we walk and what kind of life level or condition should we pursue?
Gives me whiplash just thinking about it. You are asked to define how to politely say hello to your neighbor, and in the next breath, you're asked to chart the ultimate destiny of the human species in an infinite cosmos.
It demonstrates a belief that a true utopian blueprint cannot separate the micro from the macro.
How so?
Well, the way you treat your neighbor is intrinsically linked to humanity's trajectory among the stars. You cannot achieve a high-level cosmic destiny if the foundational daily interactions are flawed. The 800 values must seamlessly connect the mundane to the infinite.
The scope is staggering. But let's bring this back down to earth for a second. Let's say the submissions actually pour in.
Okay, let's say they do.
The organizers receive these brilliantly distilled single-sentence values covering everything from table manners to space travel. Where does all this data go? Who is acting as the filter for this crowdsourced instruction manual, and where is it actually being put into practice?
This is the critical juncture where the radically open nature of the project crashes into an incredibly rigid execution strategy.
Right.
The methodology relies on a very specific, intense psychological filter applied by the organizers.
And this filter is jarring, especially following the whole open to everyone on Earth invitation. The text includes a very explicit warning to all potential contributors.
Yes, it does.
It states, what we need is positive, optimistic, and very creative energy. And then it drops a massive, unapologetic boundary. Therefore, we will turn a deaf ear to all that is negative and pessimistic.
They have essentially written a positive vibes only clause into the foundational charter of a new society. The organizers are declaring, upfront, that any critique, any warning, or any submission rooted in a pessimistic view of human nature will be completely ignored.
It feels like a massive blind spot. Utopian movements often display this deep fear of negativity. It mirrors a lot of the toxic positivity we see in modern internet culture.
Oh, absolutely.
This idea that if you simply refuse to acknowledge a problem, the problem ceases to exist. By intentionally turning a deaf ear, they are building a society with no mechanism for processing grief, failure, or inherent human flaws.
It reveals a profound fragility in the utopian vision. The authors seem to believe that their new operating system is so delicate that the mere introduction of pessimistic thought could corrupt the entire program.
They only want the happy thoughts.
They're trying to build a machine that only accepts a highly specific, optimized frequency of human thought.
And the strictness doesn't stamp with positivity.
There's also what we might call the hypocrisy filter. Ah, yes. The text takes a very aggressive stance against empty rhetoric. It states that if a submission sounds like advice or guidance if it takes an educative tone telling others how they ought to live, the person submitting it must have already achieved that standard themselves.
The exact quote from the author is brilliantly blunt. It says, "Unless you have done it yourself and have reached that standard, please do not bother us because we have no time to listen to moralizing."
It is a total rejection of the armchair philosopher.
Totally.
The organizers demand practical, tested, embodied wisdom. They have zero interest in theoretical virtue. If you cannot live the value you are proposing, the value is considered useless to the project.
Here's where it gets really interesting. We are presented with this glaring paradox.
Right.
On one hand, you have this beautiful, radically open global invitation. Come one, come all, regardless of your background or beliefs, and help us build the future. But on the other hand, the gatekeeping is incredibly severe.
It's an obstacle course.
Yeah. You must strip away your culture. You must condense your profound wisdom into one sentence. You must never express pessimism, and you must perfectly embody every virtue you suggest. It's like throwing a massive open invite festival for the whole world, but putting a bouncer at the door with a checklist that almost no one can pass.
The contradiction really highlights a core philosophy of the text. The author clearly believes that while the capacity for universal wisdom exists within everyone, actual usable wisdom is incredibly rare.
Because it's buried under so much stuff.
Exactly. It's too easily drowned out by cultural baggage, negative energy, and empty moralizing. The strict filters are, in their view, the only way to isolate the pure signal from the noise.
But where is this pure signal actually broadcasting? The text doesn't just leave this as a theoretical internet exercise. It introduces a real-world application, a place called the second home of Lifechanyuan.
Yes. The second home is described as the physical manifestation of this entire blueprint. It's an international family, a community that is allegedly already living completely according to the finalized 800 values.
The document promises that if a submitted value is deemed correct and added to the list, the residents of the second home will follow it immediately.
It operates as a live-action beta test.
Exactly. It's a closed ecosystem where the crowdsourced rules are immediately executed and lived out.
This raises an important question about the mechanics of change, though. How does the author envision this small, isolated community actually impacting the rest of the planet?
Right. How does it scale?
Well, the text introduces a fascinating sociological concept: leverage.
Yeah, the text claims that as the life and production modes in this second home become more and more perfect, the community itself will act as a lever.
A physical lever, yeah.
Yeah, the author writes that it will achieve a lever at which it will be able to change the fate of humans and will lead the world into a higher, more civilized level.
It is essentially the application of Archimedes' principle to sociology. Give me a lever long enough and a fulcrum on which to place it, and I shall move the world.
That's a great way to put it.
The theory of change here relies on the idea that you do not need to fight the old system or convince 8 billion people to change their ways through argument. Instead, you create one perfect microcosm. You build a prototype community that operates flawlessly on these 800 optimized values.
And the sheer success, joy, and efficiency of that prototype becomes the lever.
Precisely. The prototype becomes so undeniably superior to the chaotic, fear-based societies outside its walls that it exerts an irresistible gravitational pull.
So you just outperform the old world.
Right. You don't argue people out of the old world. You simply render the old world obsolete by demonstrating a functional utopia. The text views this second home as the fulcrum that will tip the moral scales of the entire species.
It is a deeply optimistic view of human potential. It relies on the idea that humanity will naturally gravitate toward a better way of living once it's clearly demonstrated. They even mention that there are many selfless pioneers around the world already striving for this, and the open letter is a call to join that vanguard.
It requires an immense amount of faith in both the validity of the 800 values and the human capacity to recognize and adopt a superior moral framework.
Which brings us to the end of our journey through this specific ideological blueprint. To concisely recap what we've explored today, we've examined a bold, highly ambitious 2014 initiative to crowdsource the foundational rules for a utopian Lifechanyuan era.
We looked at the grand vision of unbolted doors and global families.
We unpacked the incredibly strict formatting constraints, demanding single sentences stripped of all religious, political, and market biases. And we explored the dizzying 8 pillars that ask contributors to define everything from daily table manners to humanity's ultimate trajectory in the infinite universe.
We also dissected the fundamental paradox of their execution strategy.
Right.
It is a radically open call to all of humanity, yet it is filtered through a rigid demand for only positive creative energy, paired with a zero-tolerance policy for hypocrisy or unpracticed moralizing.
All with the goal of building a perfect prototype that will act as a lever to move the world. As we wrap up this deep dive, I want you, listening to this, to reflect on your own life and the constraints we just discussed. Think about the intellectual surgery required by this text. If you were forced to submit just one single sentence that summarized your ultimate life value, a principle to follow that is completely stripped of your political affiliations, your religious background, your nationality, and market forces, what would it be?
That's a tough question.
It really is.
Yeah.
What is the one line of pure code you would submit to update the human operating system? So what does this all mean?
Attempting to isolate that single sentence is a profound exercise in understanding our own biases. But as you consider what your contribution to that blueprint might be, I want to leave you with a lingering question based strictly on the methodology we've just explored.
Okay, let's hear it.
The authors of this initiative explicitly state they will turn a deaf ear to all that is negative and pessimistic, demanding only positive energy. But if a society, or the instruction manual for a society, completely ignores all negative perspectives, how can it ever hope to understand, process, or heal the very real, unavoidable struggles of the human experience?
That's a huge blind spot.
Right. If we crowdsource the ultimate manual for human existence but explicitly ban the troubleshooting section, can a true utopia be built by simply refusing to listen to the dark parts of life?